You are listening to the first segment of our four-part series, Serenity Medicine, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. What a delight to be back here with you.
Wonderful having you back with us. And tonight we're going to discuss Serenity herbs.
Serenity medicine. Indeed, I talk about the 7 medicines. Serenity medicine, story medicine, energy medicine, lifestyle medicine, alternative medicine, pharmaceutical medicine, and high-tech medicine. So Serenity medicine is the first one. It really is the start of all healing. And these 7 medicines are in that particular order, based on the amount of harm they can possibly cause. Serenity medicine basically is the most harmless of all medicines. And yet that does not mean that it's ineffective. It can be quite effective. Whereas high-tech medicine is the most harmful of all medicines. Again, it can be useful, but we actually risk death when we engage in high-tech medicine. I actually have been quite appalled at the huge number of high-tech diagnoses that are being made. My friend fell and bruised her knee, and her doctor suggested that she get an MRI. And for every MRI used, for every 10,000 MRIs used, one person will get fatal cancer from the MRI. So, sure, your personal risk is pretty small, but for bruised knee, it just is very much overkill, especially when Serenity medicine is something that can really help us. So what do I mean by Serenity medicine? What is this harmless yet highly effective kind of medicine that, in fact, let's face it, we hardly hear anything at all about? Well, in the previous century, actually back in the Victorian times, when we actually believed that anxiety began as a treatable disease. I'm not exactly sure how even to say this because it's kind of astonishing to me. We're so modern-day people. We're so used to talking about stress and anxiety and depression and insomnia. And yet when I look in my herbals from 100 years ago or before, you won't find anxiety at all. You won't find depression at all. And it's rare that you will find insomnia or any mention of stress. So we have to ask ourselves, were people experiencing these things and they just didn't talk about them, or were they actually not experiencing them at all? In the Victorian times, with the advent of electricity, steam engines, and what we would call the industrialization, we then started to have people being anxious. As a matter of fact, there was a brand new disease that came along with the trains, which was called train phobia. And it was an absolute anxiety or fear of trains. And, we actually have a similar thing now with people who are paranoid about riding in airplanes. So back then, it was thought that the nerves were not just the nervous system, but the nerves were somehow almost like the bony structure of your emotional body, right? Like the way the bones kind of hold your flesh and blood up and give it a form. It was thought that the nerves did that for your emotions and for your ability to cope and to be in the world. And that we first started having the nervous complaints. And actually, one of the most interesting of the nervous complaints that we find from approximately 100 years ago was hysteria. Now, hysteria has a very long background as a disease, as a treatable disease. And let us remember that hyster, 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 means womb. It's Greek for uterus. And so hysteria means moving womb, or that your uterus is literally moving around in your body. And it was thought that when the uterus moved around in a woman's body, that it caused her to be hysterical and to imagine things. And, of course, Freud really added to this by willfully and knowingly telling women that they were not being sexually abused, they were not being raped by their fathers, brothers, uncles, and so on, but that they were hysterical and imagining it all. And, we would like to think that we were far away from that, but goodness gracious, there are still countries on this planet who kill women who are raped because, after all, it was their fault that they were raped. It's enough to make anyone hysterical, isn't it? Now, hysteria has a kind of funny sideline to it, and that is that this moving around of the uterus, the classic hysteria, was thought to be a direct result of sexual frustration. And the cure, and again, this disease goes back at least 3,000 years. We have mention of hysteria and the cure is paroxysm. And the healer must give the woman a paroxysm in order to end her hysteria, which is repressed sexual energy. So you can guess pretty well what a paroxysm was, and this actually led to the invention of one of the favored household appliances, because especially 100 years ago, goodness only knows what they said 3,000 years ago, but 100 years ago, the Victorian doctors were complaining bitterly that bringing hysterical women to paroxysm was tedious and boring. Enter the vibrator. Now, I'm sure that you didn't think that we were going to start off our talk about how to be calmer with vibrators. But, in fact, it's a very good place to start, because orgasms make us more serene. And that's, of course, exactly what a paroxysm is an orgasm. And in order to take the tedium away, the doctors had the ability to use an appliance. And I haven't gotten to see it yet, but friends of mine who have say it's just a wonderful, there's actually a movie by the same title, Hysteria. And remember that mostly what we were doing with the Industrial Revolution, because we really hadn't gotten to petroleum yet, was steam engines. So can you imagine a steam-powered vibrator? Don't imagine it. Go and see the movie, and you will see the steam-powered vibrator in action, and you will see how serene it makes everyone indeed. So anxiety, depression, insomnia, these are fairly new things. What the diagnosis used to be was nerves. Nervous conditions. When we look in the older herbals, what we find is lots and lots of nervous conditions. And you got to wonder, what are these nervous conditions that they are talking about? Are they the same as what we're talking about and what we drug people for today? Difficult to know because we're not there. So the stress of modern life seems to be getting more and more stressful for a great number of people. We may kind of laugh behind our hands at the idea of anybody being phobic about a train. And yet we complain all of the time about the amount of stress in our lives and how fast everything is going. I have a wonderful ad from, I think it's about 1883. And it starts off, in these hectic and frantic times, it is hard to get the 10 hours of sleep needed for health every night. Right? And we just kind of like, I know you are, and the listeners are just like raising their eyebrows and going, 10 hours of sleep? Who can even sleep for 10 hours? All right? We're like, struggling toward getting people to sleep. Would you do 7 or 8? That would be really good. So, wow. What's going on with this? Do we want to eliminate stress? I've read many articles, and I'm sure you have too, that say stress is the killer. Get rid of stress in your life. But think about it. Without stress, you would be Jell-O that didn't set up, wouldn't you? Was talking with the Tai Chi teacher today, and we were once again discussing the lack of an English word that's neither tense nor relaxed. Serenity is the closest that I can come to. It's vigorous, and yet it is serene at the same time. And the meditation for today is that it is important to follow the rules, but that mercy is more important than the rules, and that wisdom is more important than mercy. So, personally, what I find is that a lot of people seem to be experiencing a lot of stress over nothing much, and perhaps are worried about following the rules instead of cultivating mercy within themselves. So I always like to put in a good word for stress. Think about it now. Bridges are held up by stress, right? That's what holds that bridge up there. It's a stressed structure. And skyscrapers are also held up by stress. So if we want to cross from one side to some other side, we need stress in our lives. If we want to get up and get a view of things, we want stress in our lives. We can lead lives that don't seem to be stressful, but often we call those lives boring. One of my most wonderful teachers, a woman who I did not share a common language with at all. Her name was Irina, and I met her at a midwife's conference in Germany where we were both teaching. Irina's desire as a teenager was to get married and have lots and lots and lots of children. And she did get married to a man that she loved very much, who said to her once they were married, "We're not going to have any children." She could hardly believe her ears. And she said, "No, wait, we're going to have a dozen children." He says, "No. You know, the work that I do, I don't think it's safe. The Russian government says that my work is safe, but I don't think it's safe, especially don't think it's safe for children." He says, "Because I see the children of my fellow workers, and they don't look right to me. And so even though the Russian government says that mining uranium is safe, I don't think it is. And I don't want us to have any children." Here is Irina at 19 years old, looking at the end of her life, not knowing what to do, but being a woman who's self-possessed. She realized that she didn't have to have children to be with children. And she went back to her studies. And in an era where it was extremely strange for a woman to go to college, she went to college and got not one but 2 PhDs in child development and child psychology, and began to work almost exclusively with children who have the kinds of problems that we now call autism or attention deficit disorder. And she found that these children needed more stress, but a certain kind of stress, that they needed to be held and to be held tightly, and that holding them tightly caused a certain kind of stress that allowed things to kind of snap into place. And that it was the lack of this stress that was making them act in aberrant ways. Irina said to us, and again, you know, she spoke Russian to someone who could translate her Russian into German, and then that German was translated into English for me. So it was not a direct transmission, but I'm pretty sure that I understood what she said. She said, life is a volcano. Life is a glacial lake. You must jump into the heat of the volcano. You must jump into the cold of the glacial lake. Otherwise, you're just going to be a lukewarm drink. And who's interested in a lukewarm drink? So, we want to have stress. We don't want to live a stress-free life. As my mentor, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, said, it's not the stress that causes the problems. It's your inability to deal with that stress that causes the problems. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a wonderful teacher and mentor. I miss her very, very much. She taught me in a short time so much about being serene and living a life of service and being serene in that service. At what point? Someone said to me, actually many people were saying to me, you give so much, Susan. You're going to burn out. You give way too much. You should keep more for yourself. This is not good. You're going to burn out. And I went to my adopted grandmother, who gave me 2 holes, she whose voice rides the wind. And I said, Grandmother, people are telling me I'm giving too much and I'm going to burn out. What should I do? And she said, you need to go and talk to the sun. Now, in the Seneca understanding, the sun loves everyone. And the sun is a woman. Actually, most cultures of the world think of the sun as being female because the sun has constant compassionate love as opposed to the moon, which is sometimes here and sometimes there, more like men, huh? So she said, go and talk to the sun. The sun loves you, and the sun has something to tell you. So I went and I talked to the sun. I said, hey, sun, people tell me I'm giving too much and I'm going to burn out. And the sun said, yeah, I hear you. Me too. I'm going to burn out. That's what's going to happen to us both. It's true. Meanwhile, give it all you got. And I thought, yeah, it's true. I remember from Astrology 101, the sun is going to burn out. It does happen. You do give all you got, but until then, give it all you got. Don't keep it back because you're still going to burn out when it comes to the end. And what we want to do then is deal with stress. I deal with stress. I often tease the apprentices that they serve a very important function in my life, and that is to cause me stress. Because without the apprentices to distress me and cause me stress, then I could just be that blob of unformed jello. I mean, gosh, I have such a lovely life in the country, and I could just sit out in the woods day after day and write and never have any stress at all. And how unhappy that would really make me. So how do we cope with stress then? Well, some general things, and then our next 3 shows, we are going to get into specific herbs. Yes, I'm an herbalist. Of course, you want me to talk about herbs, and I want to talk about herbs too. But I don't want to just throw herbs at you like they were drugs with green coats on. I find that attitude frequently among people. Say, well, I'm taking this drug for anxiety. What herb could I take instead? As though the herb somehow were a drug. And I understand that it can look like that if you go in the store and you see all of those bottles of herbal capsules there in the store. They sure do look like drugs, and that's why I don't ever use herbs in capsules. I use herbs as infusions. I use herbs as teas. I use herbs in tinctures, vinegars, honeys, and oils, but I don't ever use powdered herbs in capsules. I think of them as the most expensive, least effective, and most dangerous way to deal with herbs. But we need to talk just a little bit more about stress and anxiety and these other things before we get into the actual herbs that we're going to talk about. And there's an awful lot of them, whether you call it anxiety or nerves. These are things that there are herbs to help us deal with. Serenity medicine, in its simplest form, is giving oneself time and space. And back in that Victorian era, it was known as the rest cure. It was thought alternately that women who were hysterical and had nervous conditions needed either complete rest or vigorous exercise. And often doctors would try one, and if that didn't work, then prescribe the other. But the rest cure basically involved going somewhere like the mountains or the seashore and not doing much of anything but resting. Now, our modern temperament doesn't give much room for that. And I find that most people don't actually feel serene when they're resting. We had a TV crew here, a woman who was in charge of the television program from a major network. wanted to have a baby, and so she thought that she would come here and film me giving her a consultation about having a baby. And I asked her how hard she worked, and she said that most weeks she worked 70 to 80 hours a week. And I asked her when the last time she had had any time off was, and she looked at me rather blankly as though she didn't quite understand the question. And I said, well, we're going to help you to have a baby by going through the 7 medicines, and the first medicine is Serenity medicine, and this is a hammock. And you're going to lie in this hammock for the next hour. And she began to scream at me, I can't do that. I have a show to film. I can't lay in a hammock for an hour. I said, well, I understand that you have a show to film, and they could conceivably film you laying in the hammock for an hour. After all, most of what's filmed gets cut anyhow, doesn't it? I mean, most of the videos and the television shows that I've done and worked on, I would say 90% of it gets cut. So, she was very upset with me, and yet I did enforce her Serenity medicine. An hour is not really very much. Meditation, of course, is a kind of Serenity medicine, and it is one of the world's favorite Serenity medicines, and certainly it is my top pick for learning to deal with stress. I find that my meditation works best for me if I do it just about last thing at night, sometime between 10:30 and midnight. I sit down for a 5-minute meditation. Now let me share a personal story with you that I think is a little interesting. I've always had a meditation practice, but it was never a very codified meditation practice. It was always kind of, here I am, time to meditate. Not at this time I meditate, but my sweetheart was wanting to strengthen his heart. He comes from an Italian family, a lot of men dead in their 50s, and he's already in his 60s. And I said to him, well, meditation really helps the heart. Meditation lowers blood pressure, and actually often lowers blood pressure faster than drugs can lower blood pressure, and very effective at preventing heart attacks, even more preventative of heart attacks than drugs in the vast majority of instances. And he looked a little skeptical, and I said, well, let's just try a 5-minute meditation. And I got him a couple of books, on none of which he read, but he felt good having those books around, even though he didn't read them. And so we started doing a 5-minute meditation. Well, one evening it got to be 7-minute meditation. We said, well, that was so much fun. And so then the next evening it was a 10-minute meditation, and we really enjoyed that. And, soon it had become a 15-minute meditation. And it was so rich and so satisfying that without even really realizing what we were doing, our 15-minute meditation became a 20 and then a 25 and even a half an hour meditation. And we found ourselves, setting aside half an hour every evening to meditate, and that too began to creep up 35, 40, 45 minutes. In fact, soon we were sitting for an hour, and then, of course, came the inevitable evening when we didn't have an hour for our meditation, and so we didn't sit, and guess what? That was the end of it. We had, in a way, put ourselves out of business by making our meditation so long that we could no longer do it. Months passed. And then I said to my sweetheart, how about if we pick up our meditation practice again? 5 minutes, no more. And now for months and months and months and months, we have had a solid and regular meditation practice each evening of 5 minutes. Okay, sometimes we go over by 30 seconds, but we don't take that as carte blanche to lengthen our meditation practice. And there are very few reasons not to meditate for 5 minutes. You can meditate with a mantra, Om, Om, Om. You can meditate by watching your thoughts as they go past. You can meditate by focusing on breathing in and breathing out. You can meditate by being present and conscious with yourself. There are a great many ways to meditate, but they all lead to serenity and the ability to cope with the ordinary stresses of our lives. Now, what handles stress, of course, is the adrenals. The adrenals, we wouldn't even think of the adrenals as part of the nervous system, now would we? Somebody said, oh, what system are the adrenals? And we say, well, probably the endocrine system. And you're right, they are. And yet, they are the organs that allow us to either handle stress or not handle stress, as the case may be. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross taught us that every stressor can be accommodated except for two. And those two are fast motions and loud noises. And we can never learn to accommodate fast motions and loud noises. They are always going to cause a surge of adrenaline to be admitted into our adrenals to go, oh! So, I don't know about you, but I live in the country because there's less loud noises and few fast motions. And these, of course, are very important things for us to respond to, because in a survival setting, in a setting if we were Aboriginal people, a loud noise or a fast motion could mean that a predator was about to prey upon you. So we must be quite alert to these things. However, I'm always amazed when I visit someone in the city or especially in the country, and they have bought a box that contains fast motion and loud noise, and they turn this box on. As a matter of fact, I've been in houses where they have such a box in every room, and turn them on and leave them on all day long. So if you own such a box, turn it off. It will definitely aid you in being more serene and in finding your way through to Serenity medicine. Wow, we have almost come to the end of our first show on Serenity medicine, the first of the 7 medicines: Serenity medicine, story medicine, mind medicine, also called energy medicine, faith medicine, and placebo medicine. Our 4th medicine, lifestyle medicine, then alternative medicine, pharmaceutical medicine, and high-tech medicine. And when we come back for our next show, we're going to be talking about specific herbs that we can use, that we can interface with drugs so that we don't have to engage in pharmaceutical medicine. Remember that these medicines are arranged in order of harm, and so pharmaceutical medicine, being the next to the last, is something that can cause great harm to us. So although the drugs that are being passed out to millions of people for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and so on are probably not going to cause immediate harm, over the long term they can indeed cause harm, whereas the herbs that we're going to be talking about are actually going to be tonifying and strengthening. So to my mind, a far, far better choice. We are not going to be talking about exotic herbs or herbs that you have to get from far-off lands. As you probably remember, I don't use herbs from China. I don't use herbs from India. I don't use herbs from South America or Africa or places where I don't live. Now, if you live in those places, please do use herbs from those places. But I live here in the Catskill Mountains in the Hudson River Valley of New York State. Although I am only a second-generation American, my grandfather immigrated from Russia as a Jew during the pogroms. Nonetheless, I am thoroughly a modern American woman and would not give it up for anything. Sure wouldn't want to live in Russia, wouldn't want to live in Europe. Everything in Europe's already been done, already been said. I love being here where there's new things and lots of plants because, hey, aren't we lucky? We have all of our new world plants, plus we got all of the European plants growing here as weeds, so we get a far larger selection. I'm sitting here talking to you under a linden tree. Linden tree is also known as basswood, and it's a very beautiful tree. The linden trees just stopped flowering and seeding, and we can still see where the flowers were on the tree. And I will be back in a week to talk to you more about linden, one of my favorite herbs to help people who are dealing with anxiety. This is Susun Weed here at Time Monk Radio, wishing you green blessings and thanking you for joining me in reclaiming herbal medicine as people's medicine.
Thank you, Susan. This completes the first segment of our 4-part series, Serenity Medicine, with Susun Weed at Time Monk Radio.